Continuing the Learn to Sew series with one that's perfect for your handmade holidays. Join me on this sew-along tutorial. Welcome to the Sewing Report. I'm Jen. This channel is all about sewing crafts and DIY projects. In another video, I showed you how to make basic lined drawstring bags, and back just in time for the holidays, I'm going to bring you a couple more variations using some scrap fabrics, 2.5-inch squares and 5-inch squares. So let's jump right into it. This is a charm pack of 5-inch squares from the Flurry collection by Ruby Star Society. I've also been saving scraps from an older cotton and steel holiday line and cutting them into 2.5-inch squares, plus some white solids. First, I'll show you how to piece, then construct the actual bag. We'll be piecing together 6 5-inch squares and a checker pattern with 15 of the 2.5-inch squares using that same method. One tip is to glue baste the fabric. You don't need pins and your piecing will be more accurate. Dab a thin line of Elmer's washable school glue within the seam allowance, place the other piece of fabric on top, and hit it with the dry iron. It should stay secure until you stitch it down. Match up a few pairs of squares to sew together, and this is where the chain piecing starts. For the 5-inch squares, I did 2 rows of 3 and basted together each row like this. These are my sewing machine settings. With a 1/4-inch seam allowance, sew each unit together, then a couple stitches off the fabric, then insert the next unit without clipping thread or stopping. This uninterrupted sewing speeds up the process. If you're brand new to sewing, I recommend you watch my basic stitches video, which explains more. Now you'll have a chain of pieces, and I use the cutting gizmo seen here to separate each unit. I hit the seam with the iron to set in the stitches, and it's common to press fabric to the darker color side so the seam allowance doesn't show through on the lighter fabric. To glue baste the rows together, you'll find the seams naturally kind of nest in the right spot. Head back to the sewing machine and stitch down the entire row. Set in the seam by pressing it, and I folded it toward the side with 2 darker blocks. Press on the right side of the fabric to flatten everything down. You'll need to make 2 of these 5-inch block units. Onto the 2.5-inch blocks with the checker pattern. Start off by pairing 1 print square with 1 white square and glue baste these units. Make a bunch of these, but have quite a few extra because you'll need to add single squares to each row later. Chain piece the units over at the sewing machine with a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Cut each unit apart. Press each unit open to the dark side. Start arranging them in a way you think looks good. No science to it, just experimenting. Glue baste new units comprised of 4 squares total. Chain piece again back at the sewing machine. Repeat clipping the daisy chain and pressing out the rows. Start laying out the rows to figure out the order and arrangement. Remember that the rows should alternate to create the check pattern. On the end of each row, you'll either need to add a white or print block. glue-based 3 rows together using the same methods. I like to start from the center and work my way out to the ends. After sewing them together and pressing, you'll have a pieced section done, 3 rows of 5 blocks. I also found another use for the Cricut Easy Press 2. It works great for pressing out quilt blocks. You'll need 2 of these, 1 for each side. From here on out, we're going to be constructing the bags. I made 2 sizes, large and extra large. They both go together about the same way, so I'll be demonstrating the large size, but showing the extra large steps that differ. These bags are color blocked, and you'll see the dimensions needed for the top and bottom pieces. I also added cute pom-pom trim, which I'll show you how to attach. First, I glued the trim to the top long side of the checker piece section. Run a line of basting stitches on the trim to keep it in place. These won't be visible, so don't worry about making them perfect. Place the top piece right side down over the trim. Glue again to the rescue. Both Fabri-Tac and Elmer's washable school glue worked, although the Elmer's takes a little time to dry. No need for pins or clips here. Sewing this seam down is a little tricky, but it's doable. You want to stitch just past where the trim ends, so slightly over a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Go slowly at the sewing machine and feel under the top layer to make sure you don't accidentally sew over the pom-poms. In my opinion, the walking foot is the best choice out of all the feet that come with the Brother CS7000i. Press the seam allowance towards the top piece. I decided to add a line of top stitching so the seams look neater. Sew the bottom piece on, press and top stitch. You'll now have 2 completed main pieces, and we'll need to cut out 2 lining pieces for each bag. Here are the dimensions for the large size: 14 1/4 by 10 1/2 inches, and extra large 14 1/8 by 20 1/2 inches. Place the outer fabric right sides together and pin on 3 sides, leaving the top side open. Do this also with the lining fabric, but mark a section about 4 inches on the bottom side. You won't be sewing this part because it will be an opening for turning the project later on. Sew both pinned pieces on the 3 sides, back stitching at all the start and stopping points with a 1/4 inch seam. Remove the pins before getting to them. Don't sew over them. Make sure not to sew the marked section in the lining. At the corners, stop and lift the presser foot, then pivot 90 degrees, lower the presser foot, and keep sewing. Press the seams open on all sides. The Easy Press Mini actually helped make this a lot easier. To make the boxed corners, pinch them together. Here's my tip for matching up seam lines. Insert a pin right through the center and align it so it emerges in the center on the other side. Pierce the center closer to the tip, which should hold the placement until it's sewn down. Here's where a small clear square quilting ruler comes in. Measure out 1 1/2 inches from the tip into the seam line, and eyeball the markings on either side to ensure they are even from the middle out. Mark a line with disappearing ink or tailor's chalk. I'll also add more pins to reinforce the corner before sewing. For the extra large size drawstring bag, there is one difference, and that's to measure 2 inches in from the tip and marking a line. Repeat these steps for all the corners on the outer and lining fabrics. Stitch directly on this line at the sewing machine. Right before you reach the end, leave the needle down, lift the presser foot, pivot 180 degrees, lower the presser foot, and sew back into the same line to reinforce the stitches. Trim off the excess fabric at the corners, leaving about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Don't trim too much because you do need to account for some fraying of the fabric. The lining piece will have an opening in the bottom. Turn the outer piece right side out. Carefully insert the outer piece into the lining. Right side should be together. First, pin at the side seams and a few more around the perimeter of the top. Once again, these are my sewing machine settings. We're doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. From here on out, take off the front part of the machine to reveal the free arm. That's handy for sewing anything in the round, like bags or sleeves. Stitch the entire length and overlap an inch or so at the starting point to lock in place. Through the opening in the lining, gently turn the pouch right side out. It will take some wrangling, but it's cool to see this thing finally come to life. There will be some wrinkles to smooth out using your hands and an iron. It's very important to press that top seam well. Press the opening in the lining closed and press. I typically glue baste it shut until I sew it down. Push the lining into the outer portion, pressing the top opening seam well. Using a ruler and disappearing marking pen, measure and draw lines at 2.5 inches and 3.5 inches in from the top edge all the way around. For this bag, these lines will create the channel for the string. For the extra large size, mark lines at 3 inches and 4 inches instead. Sew directly on these lines with a 3.0 stitch length all the way around. Backstitch to reinforce the sections right before and after the side seam lines. With a seam ripper, carefully pick out the stitches on the outer side seam only in between the lines you just sewed. Clip off stray thread. You've now created openings to run your drawstrings through. 1/2 inch twill tape works well for these bags. Attach a safety pin to the end of the tape. Insert it into the channel and run through the entire way, coming out that same opening. Try not to get it twisted up inside, as you do want it to be flat. Leave some slack on both ends of the tape and clip the excess off. Remove the safety pin and with the 2 tape ends together, tie a knot. Repeat with the second piece of twill tape, but start running it through the opposite side. That's how you make the bag function with a working drawstring. Because cotton twill tends to fray, I applied some fray check to the cut ends and let it dry. And we're all done. Now you have a super cute, scrappy, lined, holiday-themed drawstring bag. The only thing left to figure out now is who's gonna get these bags for Christmas? I'm gonna think about it. Anyways, if you're looking for more inspiration, I do have a playlist called Handmade Holidays. Check it out for more holiday-themed DIY and sewing and quilting projects. I'm Jen with the Sewing Report. I also have ready-to-sew kits and curated sewing supplies in my new Etsy shop, so be sure to check that out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.